Shavua Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Eruvin. We're up to Perek Vav Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai v'Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. The previous Mishnah ruled that when an idolater shares a courtyard with Jews, he prohibits them to carry. The Mishnah now discusses the status of a Tzeduki who shares a courtyard with Jews. Now, the Tzedukim were a sect of Jews in the time of the Second Temple who accepted the Rin Torah, but not the oral law or the authority of the rabbis. The Gemara on page 68b explains that the opening statement of the Mishnah is missing. The Mishnah should begin, a Tzeduki is like an idolater and prohibits Jews from carrying in his courtyard or alley. Now, this Tana rules that Tzedukim are like Kutim. Since they do not accept rabbinic law and do not recognize the laws of Eruv, they're considered like idolaters with regard to its laws. And although the previous Mishnah discussed a courtyard, the same law applies to an alley. But Rabban Gamliel says a Tzeduki is not like an idolater. Now, even though Tzedukim do not accept the laws of Eruv, Rashi explains that Rabban Gamliel does not treat them like idolaters with regard to its laws. However, Rabban Gamliel agrees with the previous Mishnah that Kutim are like idolaters because he considers them insincere converts. And the Mishnah now continues, Amar Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel said, Maaseh b'tzduki echad, there was once an incident with a Tzeduki, Shayad Dari Manu b'mavoy b'Yerushalayim, who shared an alley with us in Yerushalayim, and he abandoned his rights in it so that we could carry in it. Now, a Jew who failed to join in the Eruv may formally abandon his rights to use the courtyard that Shabbat, and thereby permit the other members who did not join the Eruv to carry into the courtyard, like we will learn in Mishnah Gimel. Va'amar lanu Abba, our father told us, which the commentaries explain, Rabban Gamliel of Yavne was Nasi shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple. His father, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel I, was Nasi in the period just before the destruction. So Amar lanu Abba, Rabban Gamliel says, our father told us, Maharu ve'otziu et hakelim lamavoy. Hurry and take your utensils out to the alley to take possession of the rights he abandoned. Ad shelo yotzi ve'yasor alechem. Before the Tzeduki carries something out to the alley and takes back his rights and prohibits you from carrying there, which the Rav explains, although the Tzeduki abandoned his rights, he could reclaim them by carrying into the alley, and this would prohibit the alley once again. So to prevent this, Rabban Gamliel's father advised his household to take possession of the alley quickly by carrying some of the utensils out to the alley, and by doing so, they would finalize their acquisition of the Tzeduki's rights to the alley, and the Tzeduki would then no longer be able to undo the transfer of his rights to the other members of the courtyard. And we see from this story that a Tzeduki can permit carrying in his courtyard by abandoning his rights to it. And since only a Jew can permit a courtyard by abandoning his rights to it, as the Gemara tells us on page 62a, that idolaters can only rent their rights, they cannot abandon them to allow Jews to carry, we see that Rabban Gamliel's father treated the Tzeduki as a Jew in regard to Eruv. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'lshon acher, Rabbi Yehuda told a different version of what Rabban Gamliel's father said. Ma'aru v'asu tzorchechem b'mavoy ad shelo yotzi ve'yasor alechem. He said, hurry and carry what you need into the alley before Shabbat begins, and the Tzeduki prohibits you from carrying into the alley. This is how the Rav explains it. According to this version, Rabban Gamliel's father considers a Tzeduki like an idolater, and therefore abandoning his rights would have accomplished nothing, and he would prohibit them from carrying into the alley as soon as Shabbat begins. And that's why Rabban Gamliel's father advised them to carry out what they needed before Shabbat. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now teaches the rules for abandoning rights in the courtyard. Anshe chatzer sheshachach echad mehem velo erav. Members of a courtyard who formed an Eruv, and one of them forgot to join in the Eruv, and in order to permit everybody else to carry there, he abandoned his rights in the courtyard. Beto asu milachnisu milotzi lo v'lahem. It remains forbidden for him and the other residents to carry between the courtyard and his house, because his house and the courtyard are now separate domains. Now the Mishnah teaches that when a resident abandons his rights in the courtyard, he does not mean to include in this the rights in his house, unless he says so explicitly. Therefore, his house remains under his private domain, while the courtyard is the shared domain of all the members of the Eruv. Since they are two separate domains, carrying between them is prohibited. Now, in chapter 2, Mishnah 6, Rabbi Eliezer disputes the ruling of our Mishnah, but this is how the Tana Kama says it here. The Mishnah continues, V'shelahem mutarin lo v'lahem. It is permitted, however, for him and the other residents to carry between their houses and the courtyard. Since he abandoned the courtyard to the members of the Eruv, their houses and the courtyard are considered the same domain, and even the resident who forgot to join the Eruv is permitted to carry because he is now considered like a guest of the other residents. And the Rav says a guest is allowed to carry throughout the property of his host. Now, since he may be considered a guest, his carrying out to the courtyard from their houses is not considered reclaiming the rights he abandoned. This is how Rashi explains it on page 69b. The Mishnah now says the reverse situation. Natnu lo rishutan. If the other residents abandoned their rights in the court to the one who forgot to join the Eruv, hu mutar. He is permitted to carry between his house and the court because once they abandon their rights to him, the court and his house are both considered his domain. However, the commentaries add, even he may not carry between the court and their houses because the other residents abandoned only their rights in the courtyard and not the rights in their houses. Again, unless they explicitly said so. Therefore, their houses and the court remain two separate domains. But they are prohibited from carrying even between his house and the courtyard because many people cannot be considered the guest of one person. Therefore, Rashi says on page 69b, if they carry into the courtyard, they will effectively reclaim their rights in it. Now, the Tiferet Yisrael writes, this rule that many people cannot be considered the guests of one person is applicable only when in reality they own the courtyard and are not truly guests. However, if they are actually guests who came to his house, even many people can be the guest of a single person. The Mishnah continues, Hayu Shenayim. If there were two residents who forgot to join in the Eruv and the other residents abandoned their rights to them, Oslin ze al ze, they prohibit each other from carrying between their houses and the courtyard because they are not joined together in an Eruv. Now the Rav says they are no different from a courtyard containing only two residents who do not form an Eruv. Since the courtyard is owned by both of them together, that they would not be allowed to carry from their houses to the courtyard, whereas their houses are owned individually. The houses and the courtyard are considered separate domains, and it's forbidden to carry from one to the other because, again, the courtyard is owned by both them together. The houses are owned individually. They're considered separate domains, and they cannot carry from one to the other. Now, even if one of them then went and abandoned his rights to the other, they are still prohibited because these two never acquired the rights of the other residents of the courtyard, which the Rav explains, even if after the members of the Eruv abandoned their rights to the two who forgot, one of these two abandoned his rights to the other one, carrying would still be prohibited because when the other residents originally abandoned their rights to these two, that was not enough to permit carrying since these two were not joined in an Eruv. And therefore, the first abandoning of rights made by those residents never took effect because its only purpose was to permit carrying, and when it does not accomplish that goal, it's considered meaningless. And therefore, these two never received the rights of the other residents, and one of them cannot now transfer those rights to the other. And therefore, two people who forgot to join an Eruv always prohibit each other. The only thing the Rab says that can be done in this case is for the two who did not join the Eruv to abandon their rights to those who did join. Then those people are permitted to carry because their houses and the courtyard are considered the same domain. And therefore, this is the rule the Mishnah says, She'echad noten reshut v'noten reshut. One resident who forgot to join in the Eruv can permit carrying either through abandoning his rights to the residents who joined in the Eruv or to receiving his rights from them. Shnaim notnim reshut ve'notin reshut. But two residents who forgot to join in the Eruv can permit carrying only through abandoning the rights of the residents who joined in the Eruv, but not through receiving rights from them. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.